Hey, Pittsburgh. I don't know about you, but my perfect summer night includes a little art, a little music, and maybe browsing some cute vintage goodies. So I will be checking out the gallery crawl in the Cultural District. It's on Saturday, July 26th from 5:30 to 9 p.m., and it's all totally free. You can swing by new exhibitions at a couple art galleries and shop for gently used clothes and decor at a midsummer market in the backyard at 8th and Penn. There'll be food, there'll be drinks, there'll be live DJs, and if you're up for it, there's even an after party at Wood Street Galleries where Detour will be dropping a new LP. You can find out more about the crawl and snag a ticket to the after party at trustarts.org/crawl. Hey, CityCast listeners, do you love biking around Pittsburgh? The hills, the tight curves, seeing the city from a more intimate point of view? Well, do you like doing it with thousands of other cyclists all following cute, multicolored signage all over the burg? Then you should sign up for UPMC Health Plan Pedal Pittsburgh. It's Pittsburgh's biggest bike ride, and it all goes to support a fantastic local nonprofit, Bike Pittsburgh. The party kicks off Sunday, August 25th. You can choose from 4 different routes for all different fitness levels, from a low-key river loop to a full-on epic endurance challenge. It all ends with a festival in Allegheny Commons Park with food, drinks, DJs, and even a photo booth so you can capture your post-ride glow. Register now for Bike Pittsburgh's biggest fundraiser of the year at pedalpgh.org. Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, everyone is talking about the election, and it is still 3.5 months away. But since our governor, Josh Shapiro, is, as of this recording, still very much in the running to become a vice presidential candidate, we figure it's worth a peek into his record here and what he may or may not bring to a Democratic ticket. Plus, the Paris Olympics start today, and there are a bunch of ways to root for Pittsburgh along the way. It's July 26th, the Friday News Roundup. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. I'm with CityCast producers Sophia Lowe.
Hi.
And Mallory Falk.
Hey.
I know, in general, the news moves at a breakneck pace these days, but feels like it's really been a week, you know?
Yeah, I mean, this time last week, Joe Biden was the presumptive nominee for president. We had not yet been blessed with so many Kamala Harris is brat memes.
Some of us were on this way before politicians started jumping on it.
Yes, but were you also tasked with explaining it to your boomer family members at the time?
No, but what I am pretty sure is the original coconut tree edit was posted on July 3rd. Thanks at RyanLong03 on Twitter. And at this point, I think Kamala HQ and politicians are really towing the line. It is no longer as fun and flirty when it's just like everywhere in a mainstream kind of way that's also a little cringy.
When the establishment gets a hold of it, it stops being fun.
Exactly.
I mean, I think there's still a lot of great organic stuff coming around, at least in my corner of the internet. I've seen so much of the he ain't from here stuff, particularly about J.D. Vance claiming Appalachia, but like not actually living there most of his life. I don't know. The jokes have been amusing. Very clever.
I personally think you're only destined to fail when you try to explain a meme to someone who hasn't seen it. But the one that's really been bringing me joy this week is Harris doing like her signature dance and behind her flashing the faces of all the potential VP picks. And it's set to the remix of I'm looking for a man in finance, trust fund. You know that one?
Blue eyes, 6'5".
That's brought me some joy this week.
Yeah. Anyway, since Biden dropped out of the race on Sunday, there was a huge rush for a lot of people and groups to endorse Harris for president instead. And now, you know, the big story is who's going to be her running mate.
Yeah. And of course, one of the names that keeps circulating is Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro.
And we are recording this episode on Thursday morning, so by the time you hear this, it's possible there's been some major change. But as of now, Shapiro is a top contender for vice president, so we thought it'd be useful to talk about his record and why that may or may not make him a good or strategic choice for the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, and on the off chance that you're hearing this and, late Thursday night after we recorded, Harris announced that she's going with, say, Andy Bashir or Mark Kelly, I think this is still an important conversation about Shapiro's record. First of all, because he's our governor, and then also because even if he's not on the ticket this go around, I feel pretty confident that his name could be popping back up in 2028 or beyond.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So first, brief background notes. So Shapiro is a first-term governor. He's from Montgomery County. That's a suburb of Philly. He's what I would call a career politician, has not lost an election, allegedly. This is what I've read since he ran for student government in college. He's considered reasonably.
I really want to know what his campaign platform was in college.
Right. Right now, he's considered pretty moderate. He is, unfortunately, a diehard Philadelphia sports fan. So Phillies, Sixers, Eagles, Flyers. He will root for Pittsburgh, but only if we are not playing a Philly team,
Listen, the man knows how to capitalize on our nation's love of gritty, because probably the first time he was really on the national radar, specifically as a governor, was when that overpass collapsed on I-95 in Philly, and he worked to get it fixed really quickly, like within 2 weeks, and then organized this parade where all of the Philly mascots rode a fire truck over the section that got repaired.
Which is
that
like 10 feet long or
genius.
something. It's so short.
But a man knows how to seize the moment with gritty in tow.
Yeah. I had fully forgotten about the parade portion of that until our sister show, CityCast Philly, reminded us of it. Anyway, we will get back to more of his more recent achievements as governor here in a second. But a lot of his political milestones, I would argue, go back to when he was Pennsylvania's attorney general.
Yeah, there were some really big ones. What he's probably most well known for is this grand jury report that his office released about sexual abuse in the Catholic Church and then the church's role in covering it up. This was back in 2018. He also led a big investigation into drug companies' role in the opioid crisis, and then another one into the state's fracking industry, which found that our state Department of Environmental Protection and Department of Health had not protected people, and that led to residents and especially children getting sick. Related to that, during his time as Attorney General, he went after natural gas companies for environmental crimes.
And another big moment for him as Attorney General was when he defended the 2020 election results here in Pennsylvania. There's that lawsuit in Texas that challenged the election results in a bunch of swing states, including ours. And Shapiro successfully joined other attorneys general in getting the Supreme Court to throw out the case entirely.
Yeah. And then, of course, abortion always comes up in elections. Now, Shapiro has made that a huge part of his campaigns, his social media, just his platform in general. He is very supportive of reproductive care in the state.
And while he was AG, Shapiro said if anyone traveled across state lines to our state for an abortion, he'd protect them and their doctors from any interference.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he kind of helped. He was one of the AGs that helped reshape the office.
Right.
I feel like a lot of people don't think about the office of Attorney General in that way, but nowadays they're like kind of the state's biggest newsmaker, or at least it may be increasingly their biggest policymaker outside of regular legislatures. He's been part of this nationwide push to drive change through litigation, through public advocacy. And since he held the gig for 6 years, it kind of stands to reason that he learned a thing or two about how to harness a moment. He got himself in the news all the time, which I think is saying something considering who he took over for. Before Shapiro, we had Kathleen Kane, who was convicted of perjury, obstruction of justice, for stuff that she did in the office of AG. So when he was campaigning and then, early in the office, he made it his personal mission, very vocal about wanting to change the narrative around what it meant to be Attorney General in Pennsylvania, that he would not be responsible for her legacy. It was a really big shift really fast in those early days.
And now he's been governor for about a year and a half, and he won by a lot against a far-right Republican. And so some people are saying that's a good sign for Democrats if he were to be picked as the VP candidate.
Yeah, I mean, and there are also detractors, even around that election. So the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Inky, they had a piece this week about how his competitor in that race, Doug Mastriano, wasn't that tough to beat. I'll be honest, my memory of that race is a little different. It felt tighter than the Inky is suggesting here, and certainly than the outcome suggested. But the polls at the time, the rhetoric at the time suggested it was a much tighter race.
It's true, but, Mastriano, I don't remember him ever being like a super popular figure, getting people as impassioned and amped up as, former President Donald Trump does. So
No,
I see
although
the point
he did
that just
ride
because
the coattails quite a lot.
He definitely rode the coattails, but I understand the point that just because Shapiro performed well against Mastriano doesn't necessarily mean he would is guaranteed to perform well against Trump. But, for a little bit more insight into Shapiro's work as governor, our friends at CityCast Philly talked to Stephen Caruso, who is the Capitol reporter at Spotlight PA. And, he said there have been some definite wins during his time. He's negotiated 2 budgets so far, and the most recent includes a big increase in education spending, which was a big priority of his. Mm-hmm. He added subsidies for low-income people who buy through the state's insurance program, Penny. Yeah. And he recently brokered more funding for people trying to help shelter our unhoused community. He also got more investments for these new Pennsylvania work sites, which is basically another effort to get big companies to move their operations to the Commonwealth.
But I think other than that, it has been a tricky 2 years in the legislature. So I don't know if Shapiro has as thick a list of accomplishments as, say, a Governor Tim Walz, a Governor Gretchen Whitmer, or, some of the other folks who have sometimes been talked about in this conversation for VP.
The way Stephen put it, Shapiro's really hung his hat on working around the edges of a divided government during his time as governor, and we will come back to that divided part in a minute.
Yeah. And then for milestones that maybe garnered a bit more attention outside of Pennsylvania, Mallory, you talked about his response when I-95 collapsed. A few others. He was Pennsylvania's champion when a train on its way to Pittsburgh derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. And of course, everything that's happened since. He was governor during the rebuilding of Pittsburgh's collapsed bridge, Fern Hollow. He's given a ton of press conferences around the synagogue shooting and its aftermath. And he was in the news all this month when a man from Bethel Park tried to assassinate former President Donald Trump. It's just meant a lot of media time in a very short period.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. The best way to learn a language is immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. That's how I learned French as a kid. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. I live in a city with a huge immigrant population. You probably do too. And in my hometown, a lot of my new neighbors speak Spanish as a first language, and we have lots of great Mexican and Central American and South American restaurants and stores. I wanted to be able to communicate just a little bit better with some of my neighbors. So I started with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. And after just a few extremely enjoyable weeks learning Spanish with Babbel, I've already gotten comfortable ordering at a restaurant and eavesdropping on my girlfriend's conversations with her mom. Look, learning a language isn't always easy, but with Babbel it is fun and it feels useful, basically immediately. That's why Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The YWCA Greater Pittsburgh Equity Awards seeks to honor leaders, especially women of color, who advocate for and advance the organization's mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. Equity Awards nominations are open now through July 31st. Learn more about award categories and submit a nomination at ywcapgh.org/equity-awards. Awardees will be honored on Friday, November 1st, during the Equity Awards luncheon held at the Westin Pittsburgh. Founded in 1867, YWCA Greater Pittsburgh is a member of a nationally recognized movement with a mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. The nonprofit provides direct services, empowerment programming, and advocacy to support individuals and families, especially women and girls of color, while working to challenge structural barriers to equity. Don't miss your chance to submit Equity Awards nominations now at ywcapgh.org/equity-awards to honor a leader in our community.
Okay, so now that we've covered some of Shapiro's accomplishments, let's talk about some of the policies people think might actually make him a liability on the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, so a big one is his support of school vouchers, which we have talked about on the show before. It was the episode where we talked a lot about Jay-Z. Basically, the proposal is using state money to fund scholarships to private and religious schools. So putting taxpayer money into private and religious places. His first year in office, he reportedly negotiated a deal with Republicans to create a voucher program here in PA, which caught his party, the Democrats, by surprise. The whole budget got held up over it. He eventually had to back down on his support of it. So vouchers and the whole premise of school choice really has been a much more conservative policy position, at least in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, Sophia, you said we're going to talk about things that might make him a liability on the ticket, but I guess it kind of depends on where Democrats want to focus their attention and energy and what their strategy is. You know, if they're trying to mobilize the more progressive wing of the party and maybe bring in people who haven't voted before or weren't planning to vote in this election, these could be liabilities. But if they're focused on more centrist voters and trying to position this ticket as more moderate, then maybe they aren't.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
But yeah, his position on vouchers has definitely soured some people on him. A bunch of public education advocacy groups from across the country sent Harris a letter this week urging her not to choose Shapiro for this reason. They pointed to other potential candidates, people whose names have been floated like Roy Cooper, Andy Bashir, and Tim Walz, who they called vocal champions for public education in their state.
Oh.
I can't speak for all of those, but Kentucky's education system is pretty rad, actually.
Well, I totally missed this letter. I did not realize that advocacy groups have come together to push back on Shapiro. I have seen a lot of people online criticize Shapiro for how he's handled pro-Palestine protest. He called for UPenn to disband their pro-Palestine encampment, where students were pressuring the school to divest from Israel. And there's now a bill introduced in her state Senate that would stop public funding for colleges and universities if they decided to divest from Israel. And Shapiro did say that he would sign that if the bill reaches his desk.
And just to clarify, Spotlight PA explains that universities could still, of their own accord, cut ties with Israel or Israeli companies for, like, quote unquote, poor investment performance. So this bill is very specifically tied to boycotts.
Yeah, boycott, divestment. I mean, in general, Shapiro, who is Jewish, while he has criticized Israel's prime minister, he's been very supportive of the state of Israel. And, you know, Biden's response to the war on Gaza has been pretty unpopular. There was a whole movement in the Democratic primaries for people to write in uncommitted to protest Biden's policies. And it took off especially in Michigan, which is another critical swing state alongside Pennsylvania. So I think it's really interesting who the Democratic Party might choose for a ticket, given this, you know, when Shapiro is such a strong supporter of Israel among these candidates.
And going back to Shapiro's environmental record, we talked about what he did as AG, but since becoming governor, he's gotten a little bit more friendly with at least one natural gas company. You know, I think one piece of recent news that's been going around is how Shapiro's gotten almost $400 million from the federal government to lower pollution while creating more jobs. But Kylie Benz, a reporter from Inside Climate News, she wrote about how as governor, Shapiro made a partnership with a natural gas company that he actually charged with violating the Air Pollution Control Act while he was AG.
Yeah, I read that reporting too, and it seems like some environmentalists who really supported him in the past are pretty disappointed now. We actually had Kylie on the show earlier this week to talk about lithium in fracking wastewater, and she brought up some of this disappointment in his environmental policies. But then just one other issue that people have raised, this is more about his administration, but his office paid almost $300,000 to settle a sexual harassment case against one of his advisors.
That's right.
Who acted as a liaison to the legislature. Some of that money was from taxpayer dollars. So Spotlight PA, shout out to them. You can tell that we really draw on a lot of their reporting here.
Totally.
They dug up a bunch of records on this if you want to learn more about it, and we will share a link to that in our show notes.
Yeah, so I guess we've gone through a little bit of the good, the bad, or at least the contentious. Let's get into why Shapiro is maybe a contender for VP. We spoke with Julia Taruso from the Philly Inquirer this week, and she talked about his experience with at least attempted bipartisanship.
I do think one of the things that Governor Shapiro really touts and that people are looking at right now is that he is actually the only governor in the country who works with a divided legislature, which is actually kind of hard to believe. But of all the legislatures in the country, he is the only governor working with a divided legislature. And he really points to that and, getting a budget passed as examples of his ability to work across the aisle and to be someone who's seen as bipartisan. So I think that's one of the things that he really, points to as a feather in his cap.
And besides Shapiro's own personal qualifications, there's also the bigger picture of securing Pennsylvania's electoral votes. This has been a big topic of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have a VP from a swing state now. Like, we know this.
Here's Julia again.
From the moment that this campaign started, it has been laser focused on Pennsylvania. When it was Biden's campaign, the campaign basically admitted that their path to victory is the blue wall, which is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And Pennsylvania is largely seen as the most important of those three states, just because it has been won by such slim margins and it keeps kind of fluctuating. And while, there's a lot of question about how much a vice president actually impacts how people vote, in such an unprecedented election with just 3 months to go, or a little more than 3 months, I think some people see putting Shapiro on the ticket as a real opportunity to lock down Pennsylvania.
I get that Pennsylvania is an important state to win, but I guess one big question I have is, does Shapiro have enough name recognition outside of this state? Like, especially given that he's only been governor for one term. And honestly, I wasn't that familiar with some of the other state governors that are supposedly on the Veep shortlist. Like, maybe I'd heard their names, but I couldn't really tell you what they had done for their states. So I'm just wondering if there are other potential candidates that could win over Pennsylvania and bring in other states.
I feel like most of my circle has been talking about this, like these candidates, like by their first names as if they know them, like the contenders as if it is like an actual horse race. It's been really funny to overhear.
Yeah, now I've been learning about everyone, but before this, couldn't tell you anything about these people.
I know, everyone's an expert.
Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed this learning opportunity. Like, I really enjoyed catching up on all of these early COVID memes of Andy Bashir tucking people into bed because apparently he was such a comforting presence in those early days. I was in Texas. It was a different experience. So it's interesting to get a chance to kind of learn more about some of these people who are in positions of power in our country. But yes, Sophia, Julia says that normal people are talking about this same question. Like, do people outside of my state know my guy?
And of course, they're mostly guys.
I think that the conversation we are having right now is a conversation that people on radio shows in North Carolina are having about Roy Cooper, and that they're having in Arizona, and that, every governor and person who's being considered for vice president. And depending on who you talk to, they say, yeah, sure, Shapiro has a national profile. But some people admit, outside of Pennsylvania, it's not quite as prolific as we may think, as he may think.
So there's a lot of contenders for Veep, but if Shapiro is picked, he would still be able to serve as the governor during the presidential campaign. And then if this hypothetical Harris-Shapiro ticket won, he would step down as governor on Inauguration Day. And then Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis would take Shapiro's role and become Pennsylvania's governor.
Yeah, but one important note, if Davis, who is from McKeesport, so Western PA boy, becomes the governor, that means that the president pro tem of the PA Senate becomes his lieutenant. And that is a Republican, Kim Ward. She's also from this side of the state, from Westmoreland County, and she's just far right enough that she questioned the validity of the 2020 election.
So Democratic governor and Republican lieutenant governor, do they have to get along?
I mean, I would argue it probably helps, especially given how involved lieutenant governors have become in recent years. But no, and actually, fun fact, Ward has already been lieutenant governor before. For a few weeks, she stepped in for John Fetterman before Austin Davis was sworn in.
So, in local global news, the Olympics starts today. The opening ceremony is at 1:30 Eastern time. Honestly, though, I do not watch the Olympics. Do either of you?
Yes, that should not be a surprise at all. I love the opening ceremonies. Everyone should watch them. They are always so weird and so very unique to the host nation. Also, I feel like Mallory specifically might appreciate this. For most of my 20s, we played a drinking game to the part where the athletes would walk out from each nation.
Okay, you have to explain this then.
Okay, so everyone sits in a circle and someone's holding a globe, like the physical orb, like the old style. And you have the length of time from when the announcer says the nation's name to when they say the next one to find the nation on the globe.
Okay.
And if you get it, you get a point. But if you pass on the globe. But if you don't, you drink and you have to play another round until you tap out.
Aww.
It really rewards geography nerds, but like some nations have like 4 people there. So even if it's a really easy one, you can still really easily lose because you can't get there fast enough. Also, the globe we used to play with was like 30 years old. So not every modern nation name would be on it. So it sometimes helps to have like at least a passing knowledge of geopolitics.
Okay, that's incredible.
Well, I'm sorry to say that I do not have fun drinking games to go along with the Olympic Games, but I have gotten into watching diving recently. I think it's just like so elegant when it goes well and so painful looking when it doesn't. Like I'm envious of those who can do it. And then when everything goes awry, I'm very glad I'm sitting on my own couch.
Like, the only thing I'll watch is maybe gymnastics, which I feel like everyone does. But my sister actually competed on a trampoline team when she was a child. And
Didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't either. Trampoline and tumbling, nothing else. Like no bars, no beam, just those two. But
I mean, it sounds like rolling around on the floor while bouncing. I mean, that sounds like the ideal child sport to me.
Right? Like, I'm sure it was great, but I didn't really watch. My parents would like get me a book or something so I wouldn't complain on the car ride, and I wouldn't complain about watching like different people do the same routine over and over again. So like even as a kid, this was just not for me.
Well, I am in support of all of it. I feel like I watch too much. I only sort of understand anything I'm watching, but it's fun to me. But if you are not into it for, the whole sports of it all, maybe consider turning on the TV, if only to cheer on some Pittsburghers who are competing this year.
Yeah, including Callahan Young, who is on the U.S. goalball team, which I did not know about until he got some local coverage. So he is from Irwin. We actually wrote a little bit about this in our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. Goalball is one of the only Paralympic sports that isn't also in the Olympics. So Callahan Young is headed to the Paralympics in Paris to play.
Yeah, this killed at least a solid 15 minutes of our workday earlier the week. If you are not familiar, goalball is a sport designed for visually impaired and blind people. So players' eyes are totally obscured, and sometimes they wear like goggles and stuff, and they're trying to get or block a ball filled with sleigh bells into a goal. So they're relying on hearing this ball while it's being thrown at speeds up to 50 miles per hour.
Whoa.
I have only seen photos of it, but it looks really intense, and I'm excited to see it on TV.
Callahan was captain of the goalball team during the 2020 Tokyo Games, so this is his second time competing, although there's a different captain for the team this time around.
Also, fun fact, if you look at any team photos, he is solidly head and shoulders above everybody. There's 2 different heights listed for him on the Olympics website, 6'5" and 6'7".
Oh. Wow,
yeah.
Tall.
An imposing Pittsburgh man.
Any other Pittsburghers you'll be watching out for?
Shout out to Pittsburgh Magazine. They have a nice list of athletes from our area who are going to be repping us in Paris this year. We'll put that in the show notes if you want to read more about it. But real quick, we've got a swimmer, Josh Matheny, competing in the men's 200 breaststroke. He is 21 years old and still in college. Michael Grady is a rower, and this will be his second time competing at the Olympic level. Spencer Lee is on the wrestling team, and he's been undefeated for 18 matches, going back to last November when he started competing internationally again. So, I don't know, nice little list there.
A lot of undefeateds.
Right? I'm pretty sure I would go defeated immediately in any wrestling match ever. And then one more Pittsburgh area Olympian, Bridget Williams, is a pole vaulter, and her qualifying jump for the Olympic team was 15 feet, 6 1/4 inches. Can you imagine?
I cannot.
No, I literally cannot fathom jumping that high. Maybe I should be more invested in the Olympics.
I just think it's so cool. It's like the absolute outer realm of what the human body is capable of in like every possible way.
Yes, truly. There's also some Pitt alums that are going to be competing in the Olympics, but just not for Team USA. So there are just a ton of different local connections this year in Paris.
Yeah, I could not tell you about the athletes, but I did see that Pittsburgh Mag also wrote about a muralist from Wilkinsburg, Kyle Holbrook. He's going to be painting 4 murals in Paris for the Olympics, and I think that's really cool because those will also stick around for a while. He's also painted over 400 murals here in the city, so you've definitely seen his work around, like the Roberto Clemente portrait on the side of the museum in Lawrenceville.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we featured a few of his murals in the Hey Pittsburgh newsletter over the last few years. Also, one last teeny plug. My buddy Michael is also there. So he is a technical director by trade. He's already been in Paris for a week helping coordinate the global TV coverage of it all. So anytime you see an amazing camera angle or the production crews like get some awesome shot, just know it is a Pittsburgher behind the scenes helping show it all off to us back home.
That's its own athletic achievement, being able to like finagle your way in there for the perfect shot.
Yeah, or in his case, being the person like, you know, kind of from on high with a million camera screens and making sure that everything is going where it's supposed to at any given moment.
So again, the opening ceremony is today, and if you want to watch that and the rest of the action, you can tune into NBC. This sounds like promo, but just trying to help you out here. Or you can stream the Olympics on Peacock TV. There is also the official Olympics website, olympics.com, and you can make an account for free to stream the games. We will include a link to that in our show notes.
Or if you're like me, you will catch the highlights of the Olympics on TikTok.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Our music is by Benji. Mallory Falk is our executive producer. Sophia Lowe and Noah Snyderman produce the show. Lane Fisher writes our newsletter, and I am your host, Megan Harris. We'll be back on Monday with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Blue eyes, 6'5".
Which would not be Shapiro, by the way. I think the funniest thing I've run across this entire, last week is a friend of mine in DC told me that apparently they do photo tests of all the vice presidential candidates. And this is endlessly funny to me because according to her, Shapiro could not be picked for VP because he's not tall enough by comparison to J.D. Vance. And I don't know if that's true, but it makes me laugh every time I think about it.
I don't actually know Shapiro's height, but I think just embrace being a short king. This is the moment.
He's like 5'10", 5'11". I'm completely guessing, but I have stood next to him.